In this video, you will discover why adding multiple formats won't help you gain a regular listenership and exactly what you can do instead. So look, here we have myself, Anthony Mineri, here we have Sean, the guest for the show, and here we have my business partner, Tyg O'Shea. By the end of this video, you will discover common insights and pitfalls that podcasters face when trying to grow, practical tips on how to align your content with your audience needs, and more importantly, the importance of maintaining consistency when trying to grow a podcast. Again, this is a roast to show episode, meaning on our podcast right here called Why Podcast Isn't Growing, myself and my business partner Tyg, one of co-founders of GetMoreListens.com, is a company helping education-based podcasters turn a slow growth show into a rapidly growing positive ROI podcast. On our podcast, Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing, we invite podcast hosts onto our shows, that being Sean, who is a business owner and has a coaching business where he's using this podcast to generate more leads. We invite our listeners on the show and we provide them a roast the show session / podcast audit to educate our audience, entertain, and to provide our guest and you actionable advice that you can use to start growing your podcast, helping you identify what's slowing you down from faster growth. Further ado, let's get into the episode.
I feel like they'd have to find one of the things that they like, and they would get that thing, but it would be about 20% of what we do. So let's say we've got 5 different podcast episode formats that we're putting out to target 5 different listener types in the same show. And in that case, if we can do that 2 or 3 times a month, the goal is to do one of each every week. But that's a lot of work. And if we can do every one once a week, then we've got all 5 types of listeners looking for that specific type that they like. If they're just there for the tennis tips, they can skip the long form stuff. If they just like the tennis fitness information, they can skip the other things. But yeah, it's at least 5 different things that they could get coming in. And I'm guessing a lot of them skip certain things and only listen up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So imagine you're a tennis player. You probably are. But imagine you're a tennis player looking for an Atlanta tennis podcast. You find it and you obviously don't know anything apart from that it's Atlanta specific and it's tennis, right? How long do you think it would take you to work out from being a total stranger that has absolutely no context? How long do you think it would take you of listening to the podcast and kind of really looking through to actually get the full 5 formats?
To get the formats, meaning to understand that there are 5 things going on.
And to understand that, and also to fully understand what they are and the cadence in which they appear.
In that case, it would have to be where I found it. So if I found it on our website, which we get a lot of people through the website on either their mobile or on the computer for that landing page where we have the podcast site that goes through, you scroll through and you see the different lengths of formats. So if you look at a long form and it's 49 minutes and then the next one is 1 minute, I'm hoping at some point you can realize there might be something in between that's going to help you figure out you can pick one or the other. Now,
You're
again,
hoping
I don't know if that's good or bad, but if you can see 49, 5, 1, 10, 49, 5, 1, 10, if you can kind of see that and go, oh, cool, this one's actually called Tennis Tip. It's only 1 minute. I'm hoping they'll click at least one, get some value, and then maybe come back one day when they're in the car and listen to one of the longer form interviews.
So look, here's the thing. I totally get what you're saying, Sean. I think the issue is right now you have an idea in your mind and you're thinking that the idea you have of all these different formats is going to, you've created a hypothesis that I do this is going to help these types of people and they're going to figure things out. But I'll be honest with you, there's 2 things we have to understand. Number one is the market doesn't really care about our ideas, meaning your audience doesn't really care about if you've got this fancy ideas. Our audience don't really care. They just think to themselves, how does this add value to my life? Is this something that's actually going to help me in some kind of way? Am I going to alleviate some pain? Am I going to scratch an itch? And how consistent are these guys at providing me value in this specific way, right? So I think that is the first thing. The market, your audience don't really care about your idea. They only care if the idea is good and actually is going to add value to them. The second piece that I think is really important to know is most people, when they're discovering things online, there's so much chaos, right? So much chaos. I think it's very optimistic that you believe someone found your podcast, go through, see podcast tips, see an interview, realize that's 45 minutes, that one's 1 minute, and pick up the pattern. I'm a podcast coaching consultant. I look at podcasts all day, every day. I went on, the first thing that I thought was like, why is one 45 minutes, another one's a minute, and then another one's 5 minutes? I was trying to find a pattern, but I couldn't find one. And I was trying to find a pattern. So I think that it doesn't add variety and our context of marketing actually breeds confusion, right? Because we're thinking we add more variables to our show, add different formats, and it gives it certain flavor and allows us to hit different people. But what tends to happen is we actually just confuse our audience of what exactly we're trying to do, what exactly we're trying to accomplish here. And what we want when we're trying to get the podcast off the ground from a first principles perspective is we're trying to do the first step is how do we turn a stranger into a listener? That's the first step, which, you know, by the nature of the show name, you kind of do. But the second step is how do we get those listeners coming back for more? That's with consistent audio, which you mentioned, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. People don't care nowadays. Like, they're listening to like Joe Rogan spec podcasts, right? That's the level, and the audio quality tends to be really high. Consistency when it comes to the actual episodes you're covering, or the episode length, because their behaviors will change. You just mentioned like, you didn't listen to 3 hour long podcasts. You haven't got time for that. Most people might not have time for that, but that's because of your listener behavior, and that stays consistent. You don't like 1 week you're not like all of a sudden listening to like 50 times X more podcasts that are like 3 hours long. It stays consistent. The audience you're trying to reach, the audience you're trying to get to click on your podcast and listen, and the audience you want to keep coming back for more, guess what? They also have their listener behavior, and it's not going to vary from 1 minute to 45 minutes. It's going to be somewhere probably in between, but if we're not consistent, we don't really know. We can't really figure that piece out. So cool, there you have it. So what are some of the takeaways? Well, number one, simplify and clarify. I think there's so many podcasts out there who have too many inconsistency, whether that's an inconsistent uploading schedule, or that's an inconsistent way of, you know, writing your titles, whether that's an inconsistent way of writing your show notes. It's really important that we have consistency and train our audience to understand how our audience like to consume content, right? When you can streamline your episode structure, format, and keeping things consistent, again, it clarifies things for your audience. It allows you to spot specific trends. And look, there's nothing wrong with experimenting with your formats. We actually encourage that a lot, to experiment with interviews, hosts, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20, doesn't really matter. But it needs to be consistent over a prolonged period of time. So for example, if you want to do a 10-minute episode or a 10-minute podcast, have it at least once a week, you know, and if you want to do a guesting episode, have that at least once a week when it's a bit longer. And then what you can do is we have these 2 simultaneous episodes going out, let's say one on Monday, one on Thursday. As long as you do that consistently over, let's say, 90 days, we can then have a look at your analytics and see, okay, which of these episodes, the 10-minute solo episodes or my guessing episodes, which one performs the best. But when we have multiple different styles and, you know, formats, it just confuses our listeners and people don't catch on and they don't stick around. And that's what was happening when it comes to Sean's experience. The second piece, focus on audience value. Again, remember, prioritize the content that directly addresses your listeners' pain points and just focus on that. Like, the whole point of your podcast is to solve your listeners' problem, not to solve your problem, not to make money. Of course, we want to make money with our shows as well. Like, who doesn't want to do that? But it's really important to understand that if you want to grow fast, get big and monetize, you have to focus on providing value to your audience first and foremost, because the market doesn't care about our ideas. Like, we have so many different ideas. We have to test it, see if it works, see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, then switch things up. For Sean, he should have really seen that, okay, this isn't picking up. Me trying to do these 5 different formats. Let me just stick with one and see if this catches fire. Again, you have to iterate your process if it's not working. And then, of course, gather feedback to understand what your audience actually finds most valuable. It's so important to speak to your audience directly or look at your numbers and just, again, you know, what's the word? Phase the music. Is that the right saying? Phase the music. Like, I've had times in my journey in podcasting where, like, I kind of like ignore listener feedback, or like I see a piece of data and I just think, oh, it doesn't really matter. And then it gets painful where, like, for example, my retention time keeps dropping on a specific type of episode. That's sign. That's my audience telling me, hey, change something about this piece of content, this style, this format, switch things up. So again, focus on your audience and what they're going to gain from your podcast first and foremost. And of course, ensure consistency. So maintain consistent audio quality amongst all episodes and stick with a regular uploading schedule, episode length, in order to establish a specific habit and expectation for your audience. When you can do that consistently, then again, you're building the habit, you're helping your audience build the habit of listening and consuming your content. So there you have it. Look, my name is Anthony Ranieri. You've been absolutely fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And again, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. I love making these videos for you to provide, again, really provide you some context and give you a different perspective of how to really best grow your show. And in your journey, I'm wishing you nothing but the best. If you like this, be sure to binge the rest of our content. Be sure to binge and go for our YouTube channel. We're building the #1 education program for entrepreneurs of podcasts who want to grow fast, get big, make more money, and make a boatload more impact. And if that's you, be sure to stick around. Peace.